Definitely sure that curses don't exist in real life. Definitely sure that curses don't exist in real life. Definitely sure that curses don't exist in real life. Definitely sure that curses don't exist in real life. Definitely sure that curses don't exist in real life. Definitely sure that curses don't exist in real life. Definitely sure that curses don't exist in real life. Definitely sure that curses don't exist in real life. Definitely sure that curses don't exist.
After the bold new direction the series took with its dramatic and violent retelling of the origin story of Lara Croft the Tomb Raider, it seemed that everyone, well, except Square Enix, because of course they didn't, treated this as a resounding commercial and critical success. Within the first month of release, that being March 2013, it sold over 3.4 million units across PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC platforms. Eventually, it was deemed enough of a success for a re-release to be developed for the 8th generation of PlayStation and Xbox consoles, with the PS4 version being developed by Nix's Software and the Xbox One version developed by United Front Games. Tomb Raider Definitive Edition then went on to enjoy more commercial success, with over 1 million units sold in just the first week of release in January of 2014. Of that 1 million copies, the percentage of those were divided by 69% for the PlayStation 4, nice, and 31% for the Xbox One, which was the third of the Xbox lineup but is named after the... oh god, Microsoft, you make my brain hurt! Little did we know that in August of that same year, Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix were already gearing up for the announcement of their next entry into this rebooted era of the Tomb Raider series. But I want you to keep that previous sales percentage in mind for this next part, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of us, myself included, had totally forgotten that this was a thing. The first announcement for Rise of the Tomb Raider was made at E3 2014 by Microsoft Studios, but where it got super interesting was when they dropped the announcement trailer on the Gamescom stage that same year. The trailer itself I actually still find really captivating, even when going back and revisiting it for this video. It depicts an emotionally closed-off Lara sitting opposite a therapist, and she is clearly still affected by the events of Yamatai. The voiceover for the most part is of the therapist talking about how her flashbacks have stopped, how it's important to gradually take steps into the outside world and not become a shut-in, and how she should pick up a new hobby and not let her past trauma cause her to become mentally stuck. The cinematography used in this trailer is especially interesting. It goes to great lengths to show the almost claustrophobic feeling that she has whilst in these sessions. The close camera angles on faces, jittery feet, clasping of hands, and its liberal use of shallow depth of field, all juxtaposed with the clear and open-looking visuals of her running out in the wild, being chased by a bear, or hanging from a mountain ledge. Like, these moments are the ones where she feels the most free and has the most clarity. The music accompanying this trailer is actually a track taken from the soundtrack to the movie A Beautiful Mind, with the track itself being called The Car Chase by James Horner. And to say that it fits the tone of this trailer perfectly would be underselling it. It fits it like a glove. But then, much to the surprise of everyone, Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix decided to drop a bombshell by ending the trailer with the announcement that Rise of the Tomb Raider would be coming out in holiday of 2015 as an Xbox exclusive title. To say that people were baffled by this announcement would be a complete understatement. Games media outlets and players across the world were royally confused and rightly pissed off about this potentially being limited to just one platform. Not to mention that ever since the series' inception back in the 90s and up till present day, Tomb Raider has mostly been associated with PlayStation and Sony, so to be suddenly faced with the prospect of this series falling under the Xbox and Microsoft banner and as an exclusive was pretty crazy. The main questions being asked were, was this game truly an Xbox exclusive, and why did Square partner up with Microsoft when the console that the last game sold best on was PlayStation 4? The official answer given to us was because Microsoft showed them the most air quotes support, aka financial interest, in the IP, and that's why a deal was brokered. However, the more cynical answer could be that Microsoft had been jealous of Uncharted's success for a long time, and when they saw how well Tomb Raider 2013 had sold, they decided to go all in and secure exclusivity so they'd have an equally iconic IP to rival Sony's. So in November of 2015, Rise of the Tomb Raider launched for the Xbox One, with Nix's software handling the port for the Xbox 360. Now, this would turn out to be just a timed exclusivity deal, with the PC version launching in January of 2016 and the PS4 version launching in October of that same year. But the PC version is the version that we'll be looking at today, as it's easily the best looking version of that game, and also is the easiest for me to gather footage for. But every version of this game you can get now all comes with the same DLC, the same Season Pass content, and the same pre-order bonuses that we'll be talking about for free. So let's not waste any more time now as we dive headfirst into checking out Rise of the Tomb Raider. Finally, aka Lara and Jonah's Wacky Weekend. Jonah! Lara? We start our wacky adventure on the snowy mountains of Siberia, where Lara and returning character Jonah are on the search for the fabled lost city of Katesh. Jonah being the only character who returns from the previous game, because if you've read any of the preceding comics, you'll know that he's currently the only person not sick of her shit. For now. This section serves as the game's tutorial to teach you the basics about moving around, climbing, jumping, shimmying across ledges, and all the good stuff that people remembered from the previous games. But the twist is that now instead of having just one climbing axe to use, Lara now carries two to use, which on paper allows her to traverse areas quicker, because having two of everything makes everything better. Right, Pistols? 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 Oh god, no, Pistols! Why? But in practice, there's no massive difference in speed between how fast she moves in this game when compared to climbing in the previous game, so any perceived increase in speed is more likely to be the result of a placebo effect. Once again, bombastic, Hollywood-styled set pieces are the name of the game, with the weather suddenly taking a drastic turn for the worse, causing Lara and Jonah to nearly fall to their deaths several times at the hands of the elements. Eventually though, after much grunting and tumbling, Lara manages to make it to the top, where she finally sees the lost city of Katesh. But the weather embodying the phrase "fuck around and find out" causes Lara to slip from the ledge she is holding onto and almost drop to her death. Luckily, they're both climbing in tandem, and that Jonah has the strength of a goddamn ox. Seriously, fucking hell, man, how much do you lift? So at worst, she's left dangling from the rope for a little bit, as you take control of her to swing her to the nearest ledge and to safety. Once up from the ledge, Lara looks to the distance to see a massive avalanche barreling down towards them both. And once we're given control again, we're left with no choice but to leave Jonah behind and hightail it the fuck out of there. A short while later, you're swept up by the avalanche and buried under the thick snow. Then we cut to black and jump back 2 weeks earlier in the story.
2 weeks!
Lara is skulking through the rain-soaked streets of London when she sees a dim light roaming around the room of her apartment. We then get a few shots of the interior, and it's evident that since the events of Yamatai that she's been spending a lot of time trying to find an organization called Trinity. There's several documents, newspaper clippings, photos, and notes scattered all over the place, with the centerpiece being a wallboard covered in all of the above, where she's been tracing the links between Trinity and various historical myths in a manner similar to Charlie Kelly trying to find Pepe Sylvia from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. This is also the first of many, many times that we either hear about Lara's father or hear from Lara's father, Richard Croft. And oh boy, does this plot point outstay its welcome pretty quickly. You'll see what I mean as we go further through this game, but just as an aside, if this game's lead writer has an issue with how much Croft Daddy was put in this game's story, then that should really clue you into how much of a problem Richard Croft ends up being. A voice recording of Richard waxes lyrical about the myth of immortality and how he always feels like somebody's watching him. That someone, we find out later, turns out to be the big bad of the reboot-era games, Trinity, a religious Illuminati-styled organization that throughout history has fought to discover various mythological and mystical artifacts, much like the aforementioned source of immortality, in order to gain control over the fate of humanity as a whole. Trinity were an organization briefly hinted at during the events of the last game. However, this is only really found out if you bothered to collect all the GPS caches hidden around the island. I'd imagine that most casual players didn't really bother to do this, as it wasn't really mandatory, so I'd imagine that for many this game was the first to likely introduce Trinity properly, outside of the tie-in comics at least. Unfortunately, we won't be going into the story of these comics in this particular video, as it's already going to be a pretty long one already, but I did help cover the story of not just this era, but all eras of the Tomb Raider series with the help of Suggestive Gaming a while back, so if you're curious to find out more, then check the video's description down below for more details. After getting the briefest of glimpses into Lara's life after the events of Yamatai, we hear Lara entering the apartment, causing the intruder to dim their flashlight and make their escape. The POV then changes from first person to more traditional cinematography, as we watch Lara open the door and inspect the apartment for signs of a break-in or to check if anything had been stolen. Shortly after closing the window, she hears someone trying to enter the apartment, so she goes to grab her climbing axe and waits by the door to attack the potential assailant, only to almost bludgeon her totally not wicked, I promise, non-stepmother Anna in the face. Lara then begins to emphatically rant to Anna about finding the tomb, and how her father was close to finding real evidence of immortality. But at this point, it's not yet revealed to the player what caused him to stop, though it's heavily implied to be due to him taking his own life. Anna desperately pleads with Lara not to pursue the same path Richard took, pop back to Croft Manor, have Winston make a nice cup of tea, and wait for this all to blow over. But Lara doggedly sticks to her metaphorical guns,
Please come back to me, please, I'm sorry.
saying that her pursuit of her father's research is the only thing that really makes sense for her to do now. That research being the search for something called the Divine Source, and for the tomb of someone called the Deathless Prophet, the only known person to have allegedly used the Divine Source to obtain immortality. And the reason for this particular research will become clearer as we progress through the game's story, but I kinda like the name Deathless Prophet, don't you? It kinda sounds like a death metal band. Flash forward to an unspecified time later at the northwest border of Syria, where Lara and her Uber driver are seen entering an active war zone to uncover the tomb of the Deathless Prophet. Naturally, her Uber driver turns out to be an Uber dick by selling out Lara's location to Trinity for more money. But not long after that's been revealed, a Trinity chopper sent to kill her manages to make short work of their Jeep before the ensuing explosion sends Lara tumbling off yet another ledge. Miraculously, she's saved from an early grave and is able to proceed to the tomb on foot, now with the added pressure of Trinity also trying to beat her to the punch. But not before popping in her headphones and listening to the latest episode of the hit podcast, Raidercast.
Hi guys, welcome to Raidercast. Today we're going to talk about the great Richard Croft and why he's just so amazing in every conceivable way.
She then enters a room via a crawl space to discover a room with several murals detailing information about a mysterious prophet. From here, the game introduces a new examine mechanic that allows Lara, and by extension the player, to further examine their surroundings to uncover various historical secrets. Some are just a simple case of having you walk up to an object and then pressing the interact button to have Lara wax lyrical about that thing and then tell you about what it could mean, whilst others are gated off from the player until Lara has amassed enough Duolingo points to allow her to translate the inscription. Points that are gained by having Lara examine a certain number of objects written in a specific language to then level up that language's skill level. Essentially, you read Greek for Greek, Russian for Russian, and Mongolian for breaking down their shitty walls.
You Mongolian! Don't you break down my wall!
Reading these isn't just for expanding the game's lore, as they can also reveal secret caches of collectibles nearby, rewarding you further for taking the time to seek them all out. Once outside, you then get a lovely beauty shot of the tomb's exterior, right as we see the same helicopter that attacked us earlier heading straight for the tomb. Now it's a race against Trinity to get to the tomb first, and of course, in keeping with the same bombastic tradition of the last game, everything starts to collapse out from under you whilst you're stood on it. After playing yet another entry from Richard Croft's best-selling audiobook, How I Managed to Become the Main Focus of a Female-Led Action/Adventure Series in Just 3 Easy Steps, she enters a crack in the wall to get inside the tomb, which just so happens to be filled with scorpions and...
Excuse me, miss. Would you like to talk about our Lord and Saviour Richard Croft?
No.
After leaving the crack, you're then greeted by yet more lore, followed by the game's introduction to some of the game's various environmental traps. These traps harken back to the early days of the series, where Lara would enter a tomb and be greeted with several areas housing either spike pits or other dangerous over-the-top contraptions designed to kill would-be intruders. The first is a type of bear trap that doesn't maim Lara's leg, but instead locks it into place whilst the room fills with water. Escaping these with a quick time event shortly introduces you to the new swimming mechanic, which allows Lara to traverse various watery sections both over and underwater. Swimming above water works exactly how you'd expect. You can move about in 8 directions and climb out using ledges that are low enough to reach. At certain points you're able to duck down underwater to reach different areas, but your movement is limited to 8 directions on a horizontal plane with no options for vertical traversal. So if you're going into this game expecting anything like the previous games where you could swim around underwater wherever you like to explore for secrets, key items or collectibles, then sadly this game is going to disappoint you.
It's a bit strange how a game made in the 90s has more swimming options available to the player than a game made in 2015. But I'd imagine that this lack of control could have possibly been the result of the dev team not having enough time to be able to fully flesh this particular mechanic out. That, or they just couldn't be bothered and decided that it wasn't important enough.
Swimming has been such a key feature of Lara's movement arsenal for many years. It was a little clunky in the core design games where you'd often get stuck on various walls and floors if you get too close to them, but its inclusion was yet another form of freedom the player was afforded to be able to explore their surroundings how they wished. It also allowed the level designers more freedom to create more interwoven and rewarding areas to explore, as the player wasn't limited to just being able to jump and climb on top of things. They could also dive and swim and scavenge the watery depths for trinkets as well. With how more and more complicated and sophisticated games are getting to make these days, adding fully explorable underwater segments would have likely taken up a large chunk of development time that they couldn't probably spare. So with what little swimming there actually ends up being in Rise, I imagine the decision was made early on to keep movement to a singular plane in order to keep things simple for the player. As a result, its use during game is fairly limited, and even though you do get to swim underwater at various points, it's purely used to enhance a dramatic moment rather than to add another permanent exploratory element to the gameplay. Moments later we arrive at the supposed resting place of the Deathless Prophet, and after tackling a brief water-based platforming puzzle, we arrive at the stone sarcophagus where the Prophet's body should be. Only there's nothing there.
Empty. It's empty.
This case is empty.
No. No. What did I miss?
Well, nothing really, other than you're literally searching for the last resting place of someone called Deathless, but, you know, we all have those off days, don't we? Oh, God! Winston! What did you make this with? Your own piss?
Hearing the Trinity soldiers approaching, she hides in the sarcophagus as we're introduced to the game's primary antagonist. A man with a bad case of I'm on a holy mission from God because I have holes in my hands called Constantine. Dickhead doesn't even begin to describe this guy. Well, neither does Compelling actually. He's both so mustache-twirlingly evil and incredibly unremarkable that he's the perfect storm of a generic bad guy. Military backing? Check. God complex? Check. No discernible personality other than he really loves Mr. Jesus and his sister? Check. A country that borders on Austria, Germany, Slovakia and Poland? Check. But ultimately, he is but the vessel of which Trinity's looming presence and intent is served within the story. Lara then pops out of the sarcophagus like a jack-in-the-box with her gun drawn out, causing her and Trinity to enter into a standoff. Constantine asks where something called the artifact is, which then Lara explains to Constantine that she doesn't know what or where it is, and that the tomb was empty when she got there. Right before Constantine turns back around to stab her, she arms the explosive charges with a detonator attached to his left hip that she managed to take without him noticing. She dives back into the coffin and sets off all the explosive charges, causing the entire tomb to begin collapsing around them. And now with everything crumbling down around them all, Lara is forced to shoot and scramble her way out to safety before the oncoming floodwaters wash her away.
What's this?
Back at Croft Manor, we see Lara trawling through her dad's research to find the meaning behind a symbol she noticed during her escape from the tomb in Syria. She gets a friendly visit from Jonah, one of the few characters that survived Yamatai, to stay in touch with her afterwards. Again, if you're wondering why Jonah and not Sam, then please check the link below for my video with Suggestive Gaming on the comics. Lara explains to Jonah that the symbol that she found in Syria was the same one found in her father's books about the lost city of Kitesh, a place based on the real-world Russian legend found in Siberia.
The same symbol.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
After proposing that the two of them take a trip to Siberia, they then get into an argument regarding Lara's newly found drive to carry on her late father's work. Jonah argues that he's lost enough friends due to chasing around myths and legends, and doesn't really care if they are true or not, whilst Lara doesn't want to give up on her father's research as she thinks it's the only thing that she has left in life to cling on to.
I can't give up on him. Not now. It's all I have.
No, it isn't! If you stayed still for 5 minutes, maybe you'd see that.
Soon after Jonah storms off, she's then attacked by a Trinity agent who steals Richard's book on Kitesh and manages to escape it before Lara and Jonah can stop them.
And now we have context for our current adventure. Lara needs to retrieve the very powerful thing in the cold place before Trinity does. And because she was foolish enough to let Trinity gain the upper hand, it's a race against time to see who can get there first. What the fuck?
Flashing forward to the present day, we rejoin Lara in Siberia in the aftermath of the avalanche from the start. Emerging from the snow and somehow surviving, we continue onwards to find somewhere to set up a fire so we can make camp. It's here where you get shown how to gather resources from your environment, which, unlike 2013's crafting system, extends to more than you just making weapons or enhancing existing ones. Not only are you able to craft various types of arrows and weapon attachments, but you're also able to craft healing items and ammo on the go as well. Not having to dip in and out of the safety of a menu screen to heal or replenish ammo means that you're more open to attack and have to be tactical about when you choose to do any type of crafting. Shaking like a leaf, she manages to make it back to her camp right as a blizzard starts to pick up. But not before the developers make her trip over and hurt herself, just to really hammer the point home that she's overcoming adversity here.
I've got a great idea that could stop you feeling the cold, Lara, if you really want to know. How about you zip up your winter weather-rated thermal jacket up to the top instead of just leaving it hanging open like you're attending a winter-themed Coachella party and you really want people to notice your sweet-looking scarf? Just a thought.
Later that night, her radio manages to pick up a conversation from Trinity's soldiers, confirming that they're here already looking for the artifact as well. At camp, we get to craft our first weapon upgrade for the bow, and depending on what version of the game that you're playing, you get an opportunity to make Lara wear different types of outfits. Some have actual advantages like being able to take less damage or having a chance to fire shots without losing ammo, some turn you into other Laras from the other games, and some are just purely for cosmetic purposes, such as this really cool nod to the Antarctica outfit from Tomb Raider 3, which I decided to use almost exclusively for the rest of my playthrough. These could be obtained as either part of a season pass, by pre-ordering the game from certain retail outlets, or by completing many of the various side quests the game throws at you. By this point though, all versions of the game come with all these DLCs as standard, so you'll likely see a bunch of messages pop up at this campsite and various others telling you about some extra content that's suddenly become available. It's here now that the game truly begins, as we set off from camp in search of the location of the Prophet's artifact. During our first steps, we're also taught how to hunt animals and gather caches for crafting resources, as well as being given a small area to explore that demonstrates how the rest of the game's areas will reward you for searching everywhere that you can. Not only can you collect survival caches and hunt, but you can also find language monoliths to level up your Duolingo skills, maps which uncover hidden items, places of interest and relics in your area, and documents to find that give you more backstory and insight into the area's history.
For a year I have ridden with an army of Mongols.
I'm pretty sure there's a joke to be made here somewhere.
Traversal remains largely the same as it was in the previous game, except now you have the very useful ability to scramble up trees to stand on strong branches, which comes in very handy if you're like me and try to take out as many enemies as possible without being detected.
I'm gonna check it out.
Using this ability, you can then climb out of the first area and head through some heavy snow and onto the next area, where a brief scene plays showing us discovering the corpse of a Trinity soldier. But suddenly... So now we have no choice but to try and frantically outrun a very giant, very angry grizzly bear before it does... that. Avoiding deep snow and mashing buttons allows you to frantically wail your climbing axe around, which serves only to make it more pissed off. And finally, after dodging an attack with a QuickTime event, you bury your axe into the bear's skull, only for him to get even more pissed off and yeet you off a cliff, where she ends up passing out from her injuries. In yet another episode of How Great Her Dad Is, we get a flashback to Lara's past where we see Richard about to head off on another adventure, and telling Lara how one day she's going to make a mark on this world and make him so proud.
Lara, listen to me. Someday you're going to make such a mark on this world. You're going to make me so proud.
You make your daddy proud. You hear me?
I'm gonna make you proud, Daddy. I'm gonna make you so proud.
You make your daddy proud.
You're gonna be so proud.
Proud?
Proud.
From day dot, the Reboot games have always been marketed as a more grounded and intense experience when compared to its past, with more of an emphasis on survivalism over acrobatics. Tomb Raider 2013 certainly wore the skin of a survivalist game, but it didn't really go any further than that to justify it, whereas Rise of the Tomb Raider at least seems to be trying to make it walk and talk a little bit more like one here. It's nothing groundbreaking, sure, but it at least sets out to achieve the goal of making the protagonist and the situation more believable, seemingly. Which is why it makes moments like this stick out like a sore thumb.
In a great case of video game contrivance, we wake up after being slashed by a wild bear and falling off a ledge, only to find the exact herbs that we need to craft a healing mixture growing from a few feet in front of us. Ah, but Steve, I hear you say, finding plants growing in their natural habitat isn't contrived, that's just nature. And yes, you would be right. But that's not the issue here. The issue is then walking to the end of a linear dead-end path, only to find a crate containing the exact cloth that we need to craft a medkit just sitting there out in the open, which is nothing short of an amazing coincidence. This type of concession is commonplace amongst several, if not hundreds, of video games throughout history. It's just one of the many video gamey things that we all brush to one side and accept as the norm, either due to that game's particular tone, or due to the nature of most video games at the time not taking place in any form of believable reality. Almost all previous entries in the Tomb Raider series are guilty of doing this exact thing with medkits and ammo lying about all of these ancient tombs, even though they're meant to be unexplored. But the big difference is how those games were tonally when compared to what this most recent interpretation was trying to achieve. This Tomb Raider era was trying to move away from this more video gamey past and into a more serious direction that heavily focused on immersing the player in a more believable and grounded survivalist setting. So with that in mind, it becomes less believable to have key items to her survival just sitting there waiting for her to collect in the middle of a critical path than it would be otherwise. To put it another way, I'm more inclined to believe that in games like Castlevania or Streets of Rage that finding a cooked meal hidden in a wall or in a trash bin to restore health is normal, than I am to believe that Lara is the luckiest survivalist in human history. And I know I'm nitpicking here as this is a totally inconsequential moment, but I feel that this is a good example of how even the smallest things such as item placement could potentially have a greater impact on the player's immersion, especially when the series is trying to take itself more seriously. With no way to go back except from where she came from, or so help me, Lara resolves to find a way to defeat the bear in order to find a way down to the valley below. And wouldn't you know it, there just so happens to be some anti-bear mushrooms growing nearby, which you can use to craft some poisonous arrows, a new ammo type for this game. Once enough materials have been collected, you return to your makeshift camp to have another snooze, and we get yet another childhood flashback to Richard Croft.
I'm close, Lara. Close to something important. Someday, you'll understand.
I don't want to understand. I just want you to stop. Be my dad again!
Suddenly, gunfire, as Lara wakes up to see two people running away from Trinity operatives. The woman, who I'll refer to from now as Poundland Aloy, manages to take out 3 operatives before running out of arrows, forcing her to watch helplessly as her comrade gets executed. As the rest chase after her, one soldier spots Lara's campfire nearby and goes over to investigate. Once he finishes mercilessly slaughtering Lara's bed, he then moves over to some nearby tall bushes, where we once again take control of Lara to perform the game's first initial example of an aerial stealth takedown.
Finish him, Warr.
Fatality.
Following that, we get a chance to perform yet another new stealth takedown move, which has you leap from cover to immediately incapacitate your opponent. Both moves are a welcome addition to Lara's arsenal and fit well within her existing skill set. It's also not outside the realms of plausibility to have her be more adept at hunting and killing after the events of the first game, and the environments give you several opportunities to make use of those abilities as well. It's a pretty effective way to show that Lara has gone from prey to predator, and I appreciated the concessions made towards showing her character growth in this way. From here, the game gives you a choice to either fight your way through the remaining soldiers, or do what I did and stealthily try to sneak past them instead. One big critique I had of the first reboot game was the lack of combat variety. Most combat scenarios in 2013 was having you wander into different arenas to then be ambushed by a group of enemies. It always forced you into an aggressive playstyle and really didn't give you much room to be tactical or sneaky. Here with Rise, it's clear that the developers felt the same way and decided to give you more options to approach each combat encounter depending purely on your playstyle. It allows the environments to have more organic characteristics to them as well. Before, you'd have areas with lots of chest-high walls, sandbags, and mounds of cover to get behind and use as protection, but very little in the way of actual natural cover or ways to use the surrounding environment to your advantage. Now, not only do you have the abundance of flora and fauna to give you cover, but you also can use trees as a tool for the combat and for platforming. With that being said, there's definitely a clear advantage to using stealth over aggression in this game, as the rewards you get for taking down enemies silently are greater than if you were to go in all guns blazing. I honestly found this to be a good thing, as it incentivizes you to want to tackle each combat scenario as efficiently as possible, as you'll want to maximize the amount of XP that you earn so you can get more skill points to then unlock new abilities that further enhance the combat, crafting, and Lara's overall badassery.
On a personal level, I enjoyed this game's use of stealth. It certainly wasn't perfect, and at times it could be kind of janky, but it was always really satisfying to be able to clear out an entire area full of bad guys without being noticed. It's getting worse, isn't it?
Stealth in games has often been something I've personally found really compelling, as it tickles the lateral thinking part of my brain by presenting me with a puzzle to solve in any way that I choose. You have a goal to reach with various tools to achieve said goal, a location to explore to find areas of interest or vantage points, and only one rule to have to follow above all else: don't be seen. Get it right and you'll end up with a fun sandbox experience almost like the Hitman games that rewards you for your creativity and gives you ample chance to course correct should you make a mistake. But get it wrong and you'll end up with something more akin to Vampire Reign, an experience so limited in options that it takes out all the fun and enjoyment of the stealth experience by actively punishing you for failing with no hope whatsoever to bounce back. Before Rise, stealth was a concept that was relatively new to the Tomb Raider series. Whilst Chronicles and Angel of Darkness certainly flirted with the idea of including stealth in its gameplay, albeit in a half-baked trend-chasing way, it wasn't until Rise and the reboots where it finally began to make sense. Tonally, the games before were more akin to a campy James Bond action film, so having sections where the player is forced to sneak around and avoid detection would have worked against it. Perhaps my favourite example of this was during the prison break sequence later on, where Lara has to escape her Trinity compound after being captured and is faced with a courtyard of several goons all doing different things. Your first instinct is to likely use all the bottles littered around the place as Molotov cocktails and then gun down the rest of the soldiers that swarm your position. But if you're patient and observe each guard's routines, you can use that to work out how to take down each guard silently in a certain sequence so as not to alert anyone at all for an extra XP bonus. Sadly, as much as I'd like it to be so, there's just no way to stealth kill a grizzly bear. So once back at the bear cave, Lara enters to confront her hairy nemesis. I'm sure there's a joke there somewhere. And we get to try out the poison fart gas arrows that we crafted from earlier. Then, once through that, we get to explore some cool-looking ice caves for more collectibles and the game's first optional challenge tomb.
How the hell did it get down here?
The ice ship is where it immediately becomes apparent that the optional tombs are a big step up in quality from the previous game, both aesthetically and narratively. Yamatai had some standout optional content for sure, but there were very few and far between when compared to what Rise has to offer. The ice ship itself is a very unique and interesting location that's a fascinating bit of world building, but then you have others like the Chamber of Exorcism, the uranium-filled red mines, the epic Voice of God tomb.
Unbelievable.
This is God. Please leave a message after the beep. Beep.
And an ancient cistern that actually doesn't make me want to pull my brain out from my ears. But not by much. But the most interesting one I personally found was this one with the boats. For some reason, and I have no idea why this happened to me, but each time I went to tie the boats up with these cranks, the physics would just go absolutely apeshit and awaken the boat's previous life as a game of Buckaroo. But wait! There's more! Instead of gaining a weapon part or just an artifact at the end of these trials, you now obtain a unique skill which you can only get through doing these trials. And these skills are incredibly useful, ranging from revealing hidden weak points, shooting 2 arrows at once, to getting a second wind after taking massive damage, making these tombs even more worth taking your time to explore and the puzzles in them more rewarding to solve.
It's a bathhouse.
Once outside the ice caves, we get accosted by Verizon Zero Signal, who is suspicious of us and our motivation for being here, even if we showed ourselves to be trustworthy by killing those Trinity soldiers from earlier, but I digress. A nearby explosion distracts Lara for long enough for her new friend to escape, and we head down to the ground floor via some zip lines to investigate. Using more stealthy or non-stealthy tactics depending on your approach, you get your hands on your first firearm of the game, and it's not long until we are reintroduced to our game's main antagonist. After witnessing that act of random barbarity, we then take out the rest of the guards in the room. I'm sorry, what? And then blast a hole in the big metal shutter door to be able to proceed outside. Once outside, we get exposed to our first quest-giving NPC of the game. And no, I don't mean exposed in that way. Get your head out of the gutter. That's where I live. Right after we drop from this zipline and into immediate danger, we're saved by one of the natives, who tells us about a few communications towers scattered around the place that need to be taken down. Should you choose to accept this quest, you're then given the freedom to tackle this objective as quickly or as slowly as you want, meaning that you're not forced into having to tackle them then and there, and you can choose to put them off to do later like you would do with filing taxes, paying rent, or unfreezing your butler. Completing this quest then gives you an extremely helpful lockpicking item which you can immediately try out on one of the nearby boxes so as to train you to know what type of lockpickable boxes to look out for in the future. The area preceding this NPC is the first true playground area of the game, with several optional objectives, challenges to overcome, and item caches to find, places to climb, enemies to fell, languages to learn, and most importantly, more time to learn about the life of the great and amazing Richard Croft.
Hi guys, welcome to Raidacast. In this episode, I'm joined by Richard's replacement wife Anna to get some saucy secrets about his research, all detailed in her upcoming memoir, I'm Definitely Not Part of Trinity.
Eventually, after all that and one challenge tomb, we start heading towards the nearby Trinity base to find the native prisoner they have captive, who apparently knows something about where to find the source. Just before that, however, we bust open the door to a tutorial prompt where we meet the game's equivalent to the Resident Evil 4 merchant. Sadly, he's far less memorable than our robed Cockney friendo, but he does offer us the ability to buy items from him in exchange for all the doubloons and coins we've been digging up along our journey. One item is the rope ascender from the previous game, a tool that allows you to use zip lines the wrong way. But the item that I purchased for the low price of 25 things was the pistol suppressor, which in my opinion is essential if you want to run this game stealthily. Moments later, we literally drop into the conversation between Constantine and someone who we can assume is pretty high up in Trinity's organization. But just as the conversation finishes, we're discovered by 2 patrolling guards and then knocked out and captured. The screen fades up from black and we see that Lara has been tied to a chair in the middle of a dimly lit room, but wouldn't you know it, her totally not wicked I promise not stepmother is sitting opposite her and is in the same predicament. Naturally, Lara doesn't think there's anything odd about this and starts to immediately blame herself for letting her ambition get another person close to her in danger. But as she's about to find out, things aren't exactly what they seem.
No.
Talk.
No! No, you bastard!
Where's the divine source?
Please! Just stop! I don't know where it is!
Where's the divine source?
That's enough. She doesn't know.
Fuck off you fat useless sack of fucking Yankee danky doodle shite.
In a twist that I'm pretty sure all of you saw coming, Lara's totally not wicked I promise stepmother ends up being a totally wicked not stepmother. And I say not stepmother because of a throwaway line that Anna says at the beginning of the game, confirming that they didn't indeed get married. So for as much of an invasive presence that Richard has on this game's narrative, he at least had the good sense not to put a ring on that. Otherwise, she would have turned into a complete cliche.
Yes, in a twist that pretty much everyone saw coming at this point, Lara's totally not wicked, not stepmother ends up being revealed as Lara's totally wicked, not stepmother instead, and has been in cahoots with Trinity this whole time.
Which is well wicked, innit, bruv?
The two exchange some brief pleasantries, with Lara coming shy of dropping her first C-bomb until Constantine puts a stop to it.
You come!
But later Lara gives Anna the old hawk tour before being taken away and locked up in a cell.
What's one move in bed that makes a man go crazy every time?
Oh, you gotta give him that hawk tour and spit on that thing.
In the cell next to her is a man we later find out to be called Jacob, a native of the land and a total hobo daddy. He's very soft-spoken and carries himself across as being very wise, clearly having lived here with his people for a very long time. How long exactly we'll get to find out later on. It doesn't take long for us to break out of our prison cell, find a new bow, and then find the extra cell key along with a working radio.
Is there a way out?
No.
Lara is understandably reluctant to trust Jacob, considering who literally just betrayed her earlier, but eventually she relents and lets Jacob out of his cell, giving him the radio so they can stay in contact. They both continue on through the facility, finding a conveniently placed audio log left behind by Anna, and a projector with some slides that detail some backstory behind the various Soviet buildings scattered around the valley. Soon after, we drop into the train courtyard and have to work out the best way to move past these arseholes to open up the gate to the inner courtyard. Further inside, we spy on Anna and Constantine, who have managed to work out where the rest of Jacob's people are, so they can move in on their location and try to muscle out the location of the divine source from them. Clearly, though, it's not all clear-cut for Anna, who, despite betraying the daughter of the man that she spent several years riding like a stolen bike, is showing signs of remorse for what she's done. Even going so far as to loudly profess her loyalty to Trinity once her brother, yes, you heard me right, her brother, starts to doubt her resolve. It's also abundantly clear at this point that Constantine's motivation for seeking the divine source goes way beyond fixing the persistent cough that Anna seems to have, as Lara jumps down to find a parchment detailing a passage about obtaining immortality.
Mankind shall be judged, the non-believers turned to ash and swept away, and the pure of faith will be raised up and given life eternal.
Right after she reads this, the alarm is tripped and the two of them have to make a hasty escape from the facility. Along the way, you'll end up coming across an assault rifle and gunning down a whole bunch of Trinity's goons, then learning to craft some shrapnel grenades using nearby tins of beans, before then finding another audio log from Anna. And I don't know what was going on with the audio here, but for some reason there's this weird sloshing sound all over the dialogue, and all it could make me think of was that Anna was recording this from her bathtub or something.
These structures have been here for ages, waiting for this moment. I can feel their anticipation. The stone itself wants us to succeed.
Next we get introduced to the heavies of the game, who take a lot of punishment to put down. That is unless you rest at the nearby campsite to magic a DLC bolt action rifle out of thin air, and then all it takes is a well-aimed headshot to make them your bitch. Soon after that, we meet up back with Jacob, who is clearly very comfortable with a knife. Right before an attack helicopter shows up and starts firing rockets at you. With nowhere else left to go, you're forced to plunge into the freezing water and have to endure a nerve-wracking swim to find a place to come up for air. Then, not long after catching her breath, Choppy McChopperface shows up again and starts to shoot at you, meaning now you have to somehow forget about hypothermia for a hot minute whilst you hightail it the fuck out of there. But just as you're about to zip wire to safety, the chopper blows up the tower on the other side holding the rope, causing you to fall into the freezing abyss.
And after all that, we encounter the most terrifying thing, a creature of the deep who strikes fear and terror into the hearts of all that encounter it, a demon who has a legacy that spans generations and will continue for more to come. And that demon is... another Richard Croft flashback. Holy hell, I want to die.
Look, I get that this element of the story is important to Lara and is a pivotal moment for the story's events, but the fact that they continue to take every opportunity whilst Lara is either resting or unconscious to bring Richard up makes it seem like that's all that Lara thinks about. Not only does this feel kind of shoehorned in at times, but it almost totally robs Lara of any sense of personal agency, making her seem like she cares more about fulfilling the legacy of her father than doing it for her own personal reasons. There's even a moment halfway through the game where you've got to rescue Jonah from an enemy base, and the game literally stops you dead in your tracks so that Lara can have a snooze and reminisce about how right her father was and how she'll make them all see how great he is.
I wasn't there when you needed me most. I'm sorry. I'll make them see that you were right all along. That you sought the truth, not fairy tales. I'll make it right, Dad. I promise.
Lara, it's time. Jonah's waiting.
Jonah.
To this game's credit, there are moments where he's brought up and it does feel appropriate to the character and to the overall narrative. Much like this next scene we're going to talk about, actually.
Moments after we witness Lara plummeting into the waters, we see her waking up in a cave alive and well and under the care of her new BFF, Jacob. He gives her some of his Buckfast tonic wine, and the two of them wax lyrical about why Lara is seeking the divine source and what she plans to do with it if she finds it. Lara is adamant that she needs the source to have answers and to help clear her father's good name, but Jacob asks that she helps his people stop Trinity and leaves their valley untouched. Lara agrees to help them fight Trinity, but still wants to find the divine source regardless of Jacob's wishes. So Jacob leaves Lara to recover, whilst he heads back to his village through the abandoned copper mine. Right after that, we
DLC!
Should I give up? Or should I just keep tracing Grandpa? Come back, Grandpa! Once out from the cave, you have the option to either complete more side content or beeline straight to the main objective. I personally would recommend going out of your way to seek out the side content, as it's there where the game really starts to excel.
A family photograph. Something's written here.
The aforementioned Baba Yaga DLC story being a particular highlight, as it not only leans the story heavily into the supernatural, but it also has one of the more visually interesting asides this game has to offer. Here we're tasked with helping a woman named Nadia find her grandpa, who has gone on a revenge quest solo to kill the fabled witch of Slavic folklore, who apparently killed his wife. Along the way, you encounter several diaries hinting at the real identity of the witch.
I knew it was a mistake when I threw the drink in his face, but I did it anyway.
Some flowers whose pollen makes you trip absolute balls, and the answer to the question, what if Colonel Sanders made a house? Aside from that, there's an interesting but basic physics puzzle to solve, and there are several combat encounters culminating with a boss fight, which is pretty unique when compared to the rest of the game. Finishing the story gives you access to the Dream Slinger bow, which turns your arrows hallucinogenic, meaning that you now have the ability to insight infighting amongst enemy groups. It's a weapon that I honestly didn't end up using, as there are far better options available, but its inclusion is a nice little bonus for people that ended up actually completing and finishing this DLC. And it's yet another tool to add to Lara's arsenal that expands the combat in an interesting way. What I also like is the fact that you're able to go back to the room where you fought Baba Yaga and see what it actually looks like in its unpsychedelic state. Meaning that you can see all the contraptions she used to feed into her nightmare vision whilst the pollen did all of the heavy lifting to make it real. Sure, it's nothing really groundbreaking or anything that's going to really convince someone to instantly stop what they're doing and go and play Rise of the Tomb Raider again, but it's a pretty neat bit of world building that helps to make this particular part of the game pretty memorable, even if it is an optional piece of content. After a challenge tomb with some rather American-sounding Russians,
we gather our strength. Store picks and axes in secret places. Very soon, those of us that are still well enough will rise up.
And a shootout with some Trinity schmucks that results in a similar escape the burning building sequence like from 2013, we finally arrive back with Jacob at the entrance to the abandoned mine.
Stick around.
In the mines, Jacob and Lara get separated after a comically large leftover drilling machine from the Soviet era gets used by Trinity and causes the cave to begin collapsing. Further in, we get a combat knife for Lara to use and more audio logs from the POV of the workers originally digging for the lost city of Katesh, and as you'll soon find out, they were onto something.
These ruins are incredible.
Credit where credit is due. The environments of this game so far have been nothing but astonishing to look at. Yeah, the last game had some nice environments too, don't get me wrong, but its environments were often marred by a very brown and dirty aesthetic which overpowered the whole visual cohesion. Whereas here, we have a much better balance of colour which really helped to make the environments pop.
A few gunfights with Trinity and a couple precarious feats of athleticism later, and we enter a chamber with a giant statue of the Deathless Prophet along with a mural on the floor detailing the story of not only Katesh, but also an atlas created by his army so the location of the divine source could always be found. Finally, we reach the second main location of the game, the geothermal valley where Jacob's people have been living peacefully for seemingly generations. And right as we're about to get killed after entering by Horizon 0% finance and all propane and propane accessories, Jacob shows up to vouch for Lara so they all back off and don't kill her.
Father!
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Because Trinity is fast approaching, the villagers are ordered to battle stations to prepare for the attack. But that doesn't stop you from being able to freely walk around the valley unhindered, so you can pick up all the chickens that you find and build yourself your own KFC Iron Throne.
Seriously, I'm not even joking about that. When I was playing this game for footage, I discovered a glitch where if you're holding a chicken and you sit at a campsite, it would just then plant that chicken square into the ground head first, and it wouldn't go anywhere. And then I discovered an area where there are infinitely spawning chickens. So I decided to make it my mission to see how many I could pile into the ground before my game crashed. I made it to 256, and I easily could have kept going.
That's not even the maddest thing that you can do with the chickens in this game. Not only can you throw them around to your heart's content, but there's also a perk that you can unlock in the expedition mode that turns them into explosives. Explosives! Imagine being a highly trained merc working for this militant group of religious zealots and being told that this job would be a simple smash and grab job with little local resistance, only to be met with an army of pissed off natives throwing explosive fucking chickens at you.
Kill anything still.
We're at the halfway point of the game now, and we've still got quite a lot of ground to cover, so let's pick up the pace and see what's in store for us next.
Around the village you have several opportunities to perform side missions to help them prepare for the Trinity attack, more challenge tombs to explore for new abilities, and more secret collectibles to find to boost your language skills, give you more XP, and build that all-important... Once you're done with all that, you can head over to one of the nearby towers where Jacob radios in to ask if Lara can climb up and light the fires of Gondor. From here we get access to the oil flask item, a tool that allows Lara to craft fire arrows on the go and needs to be refilled once emptied. Lighting the fires then signals the other villagers to evacuate to safety, and as Lara begins to make her way further into the village, she sees a large Trinity helicopter circling above. Jacob is once again being held hostage along with a few villagers, but just as he's about to have his head blown off, one of them distracts the guard by telling them about the Atlas to find the divine source. This then gives Jacob enough time to grab the gun off the soldier to take him out, and then toss the gun over to Lara to take over the murdering duties.
Shotgun.
With the shotgun now available, we essentially have another combat corridor section where we have to blast our way through a burning village full of Trinity goons. It's also here where the flamethrower enemy is introduced, but with a tried and tested method of scooching over to the back of them and shooting the massive fuel canisters on their back, you manage to take him down in a blaze of fire and cause Trinity to withdraw. Jacob then respawns to thank Lara for her skilled murdering, but laments his inability to prevent Trinity from slaughtering more of his people in their search for the divine source. Lara offers to help, once again being asked the question, "Are you doing this for us or for yourself?" To which she says both. And we're now free again to explore the area to finish up any remaining side quests, grab any collectibles, and harass yet more chickens. At the tower, you have yet another combat gauntlet to sift through, where once again having access to a silenced pistol makes this mostly a cakewalk. Speaking of which, I am actually running a little bit short on ammo for this thing, so let me just craft some more for a second. Hold on.
Did she just craft that with her chest? Does Lara Croft have magical bazungas?
Eventually, you meet back up with Verizon Furred and Vest and manage to free her and some of her people from captivity.
Activating combat mode.
I'll kill every last one of them.
Easy, Sophia.
Conflict resolved.
Now armed with grenade arrows, you can blast your way through certain obstacles on your quest to track down the Deathless Prophet's ticket to Flavortown. The next segment is yet another combat scenario where you use your newly acquired grenade arrows in order to help Jacob's people fight off Trinity. At the top of the tower, the natives are eventually able to take out one of Trinity's attack helicopters, and once you've managed to root out all the last remaining soldiers, you meet back up with Hobo Jesus, who takes you up to the very top of the tower to explain what the Divine Source actually is. The true nature of the Source was developed in the 1930s and has been a closely guarded secret for many years. The exact details of the Source were written on a piece of paper and kept in a vault with only a select few given access. Since then, the closest humanity has gotten to knowing the true ingredients of the Source was back in 2016, when a reporter was shown a version of the Source from a family scrapbook. According to this book, the Source contains 11 ingredients of differing herbs and spices, a 2/3 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of thyme, a 1/2 teaspoon of basil, a 1/3 teaspoon of oregano, 1 teaspoon of celery salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of mustard, 4 teaspoons of paprika, 2 teaspoons of garlic salt, 1 teaspoon of ground ginger, and a fragment of the soul of God. Legends say that ingesting these ingredients would grant the user immortality, a power that would be extremely dangerous should an organization like Trinity ever make use of it. Jacob once again tries to dissuade Lara from pursuing the Source, but Lara is still determined to find it and make all of the research her father died for have meaning and purpose. Because Lord knows at this point any agency that she would have had by now has just completely been thrown out of the window, but I digress. On the way down from the tower, Lara is approached by Magnesium, who thanks her for her wanton bloodshed by revealing the location of the Atlas and gifting her a spool of wire to use to get there. She also warns of something called the Deathless Ones, who lurk in the archives below the ground, protecting the Source and the Atlas from intruders. But we'll get to those spicy gentlemen later. The wire lets you throw your climbing axe like a grappling hook, which you can use to swing off specific metal hoops, and weirdly enough they remind me of the pink hoops from Rayman 1 that achieve the same thing. All they need is to change the color to pink, put some googly eyes on them and some wings, and there we go. We got the same thing. Yeah! It also allows you to reach various ledges and climbable walls that are out of reach from previous and upcoming areas, which is good because you're really going to need it when scaling up to the top of this cathedral in the black of night during a rainstorm. Darude Rainstorm. Once we've reached the top, we then see that Trinity has once again beaten us to the punch. Anna is in the middle of the room with several Trinity goons surrounding the area, with more piling in back from where she came from, forcing her to have to swoop in and take Anna as a hostage out of pure desperation.
What follows next is one of the better set pieces this game has to offer. It's not anything like running away from something, though it is something that's still collapsing around her as she's doing it, or is it anything like a combat sequence? It's actually a moment that kind of reminds me of similar moments from other movies that inspired the Tomb Raider series to begin with, like Indiana Jones, James Bond, and to a certain extent Batman. And Spider-Man.
Thankfully, and fucking miraculously, Lara doesn't manage to go the way of Gwen Stacy after being surrounded by goons, tying a rope around her ankle, and then blasting a hole in the floor that sends her, Anna, everyone else, and 2 huge electric generators plummeting to the ground. Anna manages to stop the 2 of them from hitting the floor by grabbing a protruding plank, and you have a few precious moments to shoot the generators so they break the ropes attached to them. Somehow. Though I would be lying if I said that I wasn't tempted to see what would happen if I shot Anna instead. And yeah, it's not a great outcome for all involved. Anna once again tries to reason with Lara to reconsider her offer to join Trinity's cause, but Lara just shoots her in the arm and tells her to essentially piss off.
It was too late the moment you betrayed my family!
Soon Lara manages to find the Atlas on a pedestal in a nearby chamber, with several nearby murals depicting the Prophet's army using a substance called Greek fire to fend off intruders.
Greek fire, by the way, is just like regular fire, except it contains more protein and less sugar than regular fire. Oh, Jesus Christ!
And you won't have long to travel to find out what the effect of that fire would have been on the people that it's used on, because Jesus Christ.
That smell. Oh no. Burned alive.
That music. Oh no. Staying alive.
Yeah, do it. Quick.
Once the Atlas has been collected, Trinity's men begin pouring into the chamber to attack you, but thankfully there's some leftover pots of the Greek Yo Valley good stuff to detonate and thin their numbers with. Eventually, though, you get caught trying to escape through a flooded tunnel, when suddenly the guy holding you up gets stabbed through the back, causing him to tumble into the water and pin you to the ground. Luckily, it's here where the game gives you one of those magical rebreathers from the Angel of Darkness, which now allows us to swim underwater indefinitely without taking damage. The next area is a puzzle that has you using a mixture of barrels of Greek fire, rope arrows, and physics to topple the statue situated at the center of the room to allow you to escape. It has to be said that this area of the game is one of the better areas of the entire experience, as it's the closest that this game comes to replicating that feeling of organic exploration that you felt back in the core design era. You're given a large area with a central problem to solve as its focus, and are free to explore and experiment at your own pace. And by this point, you've accumulated all of your traversal abilities and are given many opportunities to use all of these in combination, plus what you've learned throughout your current journey to naturally arrive at the logical solution. And as short as this section of the game is, it's nice to see that someone on the Rise development team remembered what Tomb Raider was actually all about and was able to convince the rest to include moments like this to harken back to its roots.
This commemorates the construction of a great city.
But because the statue you decided to topple was that of the Deathless Prophet, several surviving members of his devout undead army take umbrage to your rampant acts of heresy and start to pepper you with more arrows than a YouTube clickbait video thumbnail. Soon after that, we make it out alive and get a call from Jacob, who wants us to come meet him at the observatory in the mountains. At the observatory, Lara and Jonah use the Atlas to pinpoint the location of the Divine Source and the lost city of Katesh.
Stop! Jonah, time.
And it quickly becomes apparent that Jacob already knew all of this from the very start. But of course, because we can't have nice things, Trinity blasts the apparatus holding the Atlas, causing the ceiling to collapse. Lara is then pushed out through a window and is left dangling on a chain, whilst Jonah is left to collect the Atlas and juggernaut his way through the incoming troops. Sadly, just as quickly as Jonah is reintroduced to the story, he gets literally yeeted out of it again by a member of Trinity, who captures him and airlifts him away in a manner not too dissimilar from Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain's Fulton recovery system. Lara naturally wants to go out and save her one surviving friend from Yamatai who still likes her, but a wounded Jacob warns that if she does, she risks giving up on finding the very thing that she came out here to search for.
I have to go after Jonah.
Even if it means giving up the truth you came here to find.
He risked his life to come.
From here, we head back to the first area of the game to go after Jonah! And after searching a nearby big, strong, box, we gain access to the broadhead climbing arrows. These essentially allow us to create grapple points in certain surfaces to allow us to climb up to them to access higher ledges, something that will come in very handy on more than one occasion later on in this game. From here, we travel back to the area right before Lara's capture at the chapel in order to mount a rescue mission to save our recently yeeted colleague of questionable importance. But it's here where the game stops you dead in your tracks so that Lara can have a flashback about her father, and by the time that she wakes up, it's now daylight and she's lost her tactical nighttime advantage. So much for this rescue mission being fucking urgent, I guess. Further up the trail, we get more platforming sections that make us use all of the gadgets we've accumulated so far, and we spy a large tower in the distance which Lara assumes is where they're keeping Jonah. Inside the tower, the Lannister twins have already used the Atlas to find the location of the source, and it's also here where Constantine reveals to the audience his plans to betray Trinity and use the Divine Source to raise an immortal army for Jeebus Christ and cleanse the world of sinners. Oh, terrible naughty sinners, you must be punished by Daddy Constantine.
I should probably mention a fairly important plot detail to do with our main man Constantine over here. When him and Anna were growing up in a Catholic orphanage, Anna just decided to stab him in the hands and then whisper some sweet nothings into his ear whilst he was asleep. So now, as a result, our boy here thinks that he's got a good case of the Messiahs and that he's God's chosen one.
Two questions about that, though. One is, why? And the other is, how in the hell did she do all of that without waking him up? Not to mention the years that this guy has been walking around with, I'm guessing, open wounds on his hands for. And I'm surprised that this guy hasn't contracted all the diseases known to man by now. Going for a piss for this man must be like taking your life into your own fucking hands. How have these wounds been this fresh for this many years? Does he pick them open himself, or does his sister keep sneaking into his room to re-stab them every night like some kind of sadistic fucking hole punch?
Meanwhile...
So once past all the patrolling guards, you eventually manage to climb to the top of the tower where you find the Atlas ripe for the taking. But just as you go to do so, you hear Jonah being tortured at a different location, meaning it's back down we go to try and rescue him for good and proper. So after zipping, splashing, and sliding your way back down to the building below, you encounter more of Jacob's people being held prisoner, which you kindly set free by tossing them the cell keys. Down the corridor is where Jonah is being held captive, and wouldn't you know it, Constantine is there trying to get information out of him. Presumably to find out how he's able to shapeshift between games. Of course, the glass looking into the room is bulletproof, so Lara's shots don't land, but this gives Jonah enough time to hulk out of his bindings and tackle him into the ground. Now holding his gun, Lara goads Jonah to finish off Constantine, but because Jonah isn't as much of a #survivor/killer as Lara, he falls for Constantine's attempt to play the "I was just doing what I thought was right" card and ends up getting stabbed for his troubles. Soon after managing to smash the window in with a fire extinguisher, she manages to get to Jonah, who apologizes for not shooting the guy when he had the chance. The prisoners from earlier then arrive to warn Lara that they're all being surrounded by Trinity's men, and that because of his wound, Jonah doesn't have much time left. Heroically, Lara ventures outside and tells everyone to barricade the doors to make sure that nobody gets in while she goes to deal with the oncoming threat. Before that, you have a brief moment to save your progress and apply any upgrades that may help you on your upcoming suicide mission. And you'll never guess what she chooses to do in this moment of brief respite before going full Rambo on a bunch of troops to save your friend's life. She chooses this moment to listen to an audio log from her father that has nothing at all to do with the situation at hand, and instead is him telling her not to read bad news stories about him.
I know that you like to read the archaeological journals now, but I urge you that if you see anything written which is less than pleasant about me, to ignore it. There are those who simply do not understand the work I'm doing here. Perhaps they're even frightened by it, but their fear and stupidity is not my concern, and neither should it be yours. I will explain everything in good time, my darling girl.
What the fuck has this got to do with anything that's happening right now?
I bet we all really wish we had a father like Richard Croft in our lives, don't we? Imagine having someone like that you could just apply to any situation and it would just instantly make it better. Feeling bad about yourself? Richard Croft. Having a bad day at work? Richard Croft. Want someone to help marathon that anime with? Richard Croft. Need someone to help file your tax returns? Richard Croft. Need to change a flat tire? Richard Croft. Need to drive out into the woods to bury a body? Richard Croft. Need to bury a loved one? Richard Croft. Need to dispose of the evidence? Richard Croft.
And now that we're suitably motivated, we go off to deal with those pesky Trinity people by giving them a quick bath. Then we return to Jonah only to find him knocking on death's door. Jonah then imparts some would-be final wisdom to Lara, telling her to not blame herself for everything that has happened to the people around her, and that they all make their own choices in life.
Just listen. You can't blame yourself anymore. We all make our own choices.
But surprisingly, one of the prisoners just says that they can fix him if they can get him back to Jacob at the observatory. Somehow, even though he's literally about to die, to a place that's several miles away, with varying degrees of difficult and treacherous terrain to cross. Amazingly, Jonah is able to hang on to life long enough for the group to make the trip back to the village with him on a stretcher, somehow, and soon after a quick sprinkling of pixie dust and some Hail Marys, his mortal wound is completely healed.
The Lord God you're going and coming, from now to all time.
It's clear at this point that Jacob is not who he seems, with his earlier gunshot being completely healed as well, which then leads Lara to concluding that Jacob and the Deathless Prophet are one and the same person.
You are him, aren't you? The Deathless Prophet.
I can feel pain. I can be hurt. I am human. Save for a human ending.
He also explains that he used the power only once to create the army of Deathless Ones, the same army encountered earlier, who were so dedicated to their cause that they committed the atrocity of mass murder in order to prevent Kitesh's enemies from obtaining the source. The army used the ice from the mountains to engulf the whole city to keep the Divine Source's power safe, but killing thousands of innocent people in the process. So in order to stop Trinity doing the same but on a much grander scale, I mean that metaphorically by the way, not that they're literally going to cover the world in ice like a Captain Planet villain, Lara has to travel through the hidden path of the Deathless in order to get to the source before Trinity. Tesco Value Aloy offers to delay Trinity for as long as she and her army can, whilst Jacob opens the way to the Batcave. Down the path and past all of Jacob's collection of giant toothpicks, we get to possibly the best looking puzzle platforming set piece of the game, the Orrery. But you, like me, probably already knew that. I'll see myself out. Essentially, you're jumping around an ancient and ornate version of one of those things for babies that you hang over their cribs, except you're the baby and you're a fraction of the size. This challenge has you using this giant machine to gain access to the top of the chamber to then gain access to Kitesh. And what I find quite enjoyable about this puzzle is how you get to use all of the tools in your arsenal to interact with the environment in some quite clever ways. Each arm or mechanism has to be pulled or pushed into the correct place, and then you have to decide whether or not you need to grapple or swing or climb up to get over to the next area, and all whilst precariously hanging over an instant death pit. Later on, you then get to release a clamp holding everything into place, increasing the challenge further by having you navigate the same platforming challenges, but all whilst everything is spinning around madly.
One thing that I do find kind of immersion breaking with this particular era of the series is how Lara just keeps constantly talking to herself out loud during various moments of gameplay. It's obviously a thinly veiled way for the developers to be able to provide players with hints and tips on where they need to go or what they need to do next, but often a lot of the time it meant that I felt that the game was spelling out a lot of what needed to be done for me instead of trusting me to be able to work it out for myself. And this might be something that's just indicative of modern game design, sure, but something I personally enjoyed about the core design era of games was how, for better or for worse, you were left to your own devices to be able to work all of this stuff out for yourself.
Of course, for modern players, certain concessions need to be made in order to make sure that the challenge doesn't suddenly spike. But it does make her sound like a crazy person when she's yelling at herself to keep going, or in this case, yelling at herself to know when to drop from a ledge.
Patience, Lara. Now!
But regardless, we make it to the top and unlock the classically trained skill, which sadly isn't a skill that lets you play Vivaldi like a boss, but instead is an archery skill that allows you to quick-fire more arrows in succession. Moments later, we have our second instance of Lara Croft secretly climbs ledges whilst a supernatural army walks by, as the army of the Deathless Ones prepare to retaliate to Trinity's attempts to claim the source. It has to be said that the views that you get during this segment are really breathtaking. The modern graphics really get their chance to flex their stuff in these moments. And the best part during all of this? No fucking Richard Croft either, not even at the campsites. So that's a win. It's also amazing that she's not been seen once during all of this, but her good fortune then decides to run out when a dodgy zip wire leads Lara to almost giving her position away. That is until you climb up and then realize...
Gotcha, bitch!
Mashing the melee button allows you to kill the, Deathless One, so we now have to contend with a whole horde of these guys in a manner similar to the Storm Guard from Yamatai. And that means one giant combat section where you have to, air quotes, kill the supposedly immortal beings by using the environment and every ounce of firepower that you have at your disposal. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, we arrive at the lost city of Kitesh, and at the location of the Divine Source, which is situated at the top of the main palace.
The Chamber of Souls. The Divine Source has to be there.
So here we are, the final area of the game. The resting place of the Divine Source, and the culmination of your father's entire life's work, and the goal that your rival Trinity has been working towards for centuries. You know what? I'm just going to take my time here and just really explore this wide open area for myself. You know, really soak in its natural haunting beauty and take stock of every single discovery that I find. Plus, I'm sure that I'll be able to sneak past these folk no problem, and I'm definitely sure that this won't suddenly turn into another combat scenario.
Right as Lara approaches the gate to get into the palace, the gate slams shut and she is immediately bombarded with catapults yeeting Greek fire at her.
Oh, for God's sake.
So now we've got to make our way past several heavily armored, supposedly immortal Greek soldiers in order to take control of the catapult in order to use that to then open the gate for ourselves. Luckily though, this area has lots of places to climb up into and zip around in order to avoid having to take them on in a straight up fight. So it's not long until you're able to reach King Yeetabix in order to open up the gate. There's also another challenge tomb in this area that I like to call Satan's Butthole, where you have to use a hole in the wall to flood the chamber with explosive fart gas, then set it off to launch a metal torture cage into a giant gate to delicately open it. The reward for this is the recipe for Greek fire, meaning that you now have the ability to even the odds with any fire arrows or molotovs that you crafted now being able to melt through armor. Once through the destroyed gate from earlier, you then get a moment to rest at a campsite and also catch up on the latest chapter of Richard Croft's autobiography.
Before I even held you, I almost lost you, Lara. Yet you fought back, determined to live, breathe, ball your tiny fists and scream the hospital down. It was the best noise I ever heard. When I went home that snowy night, I cooked myself a steak. Then I drank half a bottle of whiskey, tried to make snowshoes out of tennis rackets, and fell asleep with the cat. I was so damn happy.
I think I must have heard that story about a dozen times, and I could hear it a dozen more. I wish that could have lasted. I wish we'd had more time.
Once further into the complex, you find a body riddled with armor-piercing arrows, which is another weapon upgrade to add to your arsenal. As soon as you do this, you're then immediately ambushed again by a horde of deathless ones who all rain fire down on you and rush your position. Thankfully, you now have the power of Greek fire with armor-piercing arrows and some good old-fashioned dragon's breath rounds, so it's not long until you get rid of these pests and are off to find the next trebuchet to use.
That really hurt!
On the way, you get a call from Jacob's daughter, reminding you that you need to get to the source before they do.
You don't have much time, Lara. You must reach the source before them.
Well, gee, thanks for reminding me. I was just aimlessly wandering around with no purpose until you showed up. I know I've got ADHD and all, but Jesus Christ.
A few yeets and a physics puzzle later, we manage to break open the front gate of the Chamber of Souls. But of course, as soon as we go through, we're immediately shat upon by molten death rocks! Meaning we have yet another episode of Lara Croft person who runs away from things collapsing around her in order to make it to safety. Another combat arena later, and we see that Trinity have blasted a hole in the ice above the temple, causing massive chunks of ice to rain down from the sky. From here, we essentially have a recreation of the final climb segment from the previous game, where we were ascending up the side of an icy building whilst all hell was breaking loose around us. This time, instead of a chaotic storm attacking the building, you've instead got both sides fighting it out whilst getting bombarded with siege weaponry instead. Once at the top, Lara somehow manages to see Anna through all the chaos, even though you totally would need binoculars to do that. But what's funnier is that moments later, after Lara receives backup from Timu Aloy, she's not only able to see Lara from a position that would be too far away, but she also doesn't have line of sight.
That reminds me, actually, I really need to start eating more carrots. Yummy.
At last, we're at the final campfire before the final confrontation with Trinity, and the final boss is a fight between you on the ground and Constantine in an attack helicopter. Regular gunfire and arrows won't do a thing to hurt it, so the gimmick here is to call your scissor sister from an immortal mister to fire a shot of Greek fire at the helicopter for you to then shoot and damage the helicopter that way instead.
God, it's worked! You did it! It's not over yet.
Once you've done enough damage, you then cause the helicopter to crash into the level below, which in turn causes the floor to collapse and sends you plummeting down. In this chamber, you have more Greek soldiers to fight before getting ambushed by Constantine, who somehow survived the crash. He hits Lara over the back of the head and takes her bow, which for some reason also completely disarms her of all of her other weapons as well. So this fight is a game of cat and mouse, where you have to avoid detection whilst finding items around the environment to craft into weapons. Once you've stunned him with an improvised explosive, you can run up to him and attack him with your climbing axe. Doing this twice allows you to gain the upper hand and stab him in the chest with the power of QuickTime events. A mortally wounded Constantine then reflects on how the divine source has been his destiny, how he was destined for greatness. But in the end, Lara tells him that all of this talk of divine prophecy and being chosen by God was a lie fabricated by his sister in order to gain power within Trinity. Lara goes to leave before the temple collapses, but as she goes to do this, Constantine shouts out after her with a shocking revelation regarding our Lord and Savior Richard Croft. Turns out old Dickie here didn't kill himself, but was instead assassinated by Trinity after uncovering too much about the Deathless Prophet, and something else that we'll get to in the next game. The whole thing was staged to look like suicide, and it was originally Anna who was meant to do the deed, but she couldn't do it because the two of them had grown close. It's here where you have a moral choice to make. You can either continue to walk away from Constantine and leave him up to his fate, or you could do what I did, which was to pick up a tin of beans off the floor and then casually throw it into his face to directly kill him instead, which caused him to die in the most flamboyant and over-the-top way possible, all whilst in slow motion, and all, most hilariously, also somehow counting as a stealth kill too. You can't write this stuff.
Full disclosure here, I did actually reach out to a member of the Tomb Raider modding community to ask if they could somehow replace all the tins of beans in this particular level with chickens, but sadly they weren't actually able to get that to work. So here instead is a dramatic reenactment of what that would have looked like.
You're lying.
He begged for his life, and when that failed, he begged for yours.
You're wrong! Shut up! Just shut up!
With that out of the way, we finally enter the Chamber of Souls to catch up to Anna, who at this point is holding the divine source. Lara tries to reason with Anna by telling her that her brother is dead and that all of her Trinity soldiers are too. Although she has no plans to hand the source over to Trinity, Anna desperately tries to turn the argument back around to Lara by asking her why she is so willing to just let the source of her father's work go and to forever leave his legacy mocked by history. Lara accepts that she needs to make this sacrifice for the greater good of humanity, rather than keeping it for a personal and perhaps more selfish reason. Together they then wax philosophical about their own personal motivations, the good the source could do for humanity, and about how death is a part of life and is all what makes being human, human. Not long after that, Jacob then enters the chat, but just ends up getting a few bullets at him for good measure from Anna, instead of really doing anything helpful. Then the army of Deathless Ones show up to further complicate matters, which causes Anna to use the divine source in a final act of desperation.
Please. I'm dying. This is my only hope. Anna, no!
Much like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the power of God only affects people who are directly looking at it, so as a result Anna begins to absorb the power of the source whilst Lara shields her eyes from looking at it directly. However, the power of the source proves to be too great for Anna as she slumps to the floor and drops the source, allowing Lara to pick it up. Faced with the oncoming army of the undead and nowhere else to go, she decides to destroy the source by throwing it into the floor and shattering it into pieces. She glances over to Jacob, who she knows will succumb to his gunshot wounds if she goes through with it, but he smiles and reassures her that this is the right thing to do.
I threw it on the ground!
Once the source is destroyed, the remaining Deathless Ones begin to burn away as the power of the source disperses up into the sky and into nothingness. Of course, much as Lara predicted, Jacob, now free of the power of immortality himself, finally begins to die. But instead of being fearful and full of regret, he instead willingly embraces death with a smile, almost as if this moment had been what he'd been waiting for this whole time. Lara apologizes, saying that all she wanted to do was make a difference, to which Jacob replies with his final words, "You already have," before then fading away like dust in the wind.
All we are is dust in the wind, dude.
The final scene is back at Croft Manor, with a voiceover from Richard Croft remarking on how his father would be turning in his grave if he knew the shame that he'd brought to the family name, and that he hopes that Lara can make her own mark on this world. He finishes with a quote saying, "The extraordinary is in what we do, not who we are," which is the very same word said by Lara at the beginning of the previous game, only now we know that it was said by her father, Once the tape ends, she remarks about how she still feels like she let her father down, to which Jonah reassures her that her father would have likely done the same in her shoes. The two then leave to catch a plane, with a voiceover from Lara talking about how even though she's heard this tape hundreds of times, this time it was like she heard it for the first time. As she further talks about discovering new myths and legends, the camera pulls back over the desk to reveal a map of New Spain with a red circle over a portion of the map, surrounded by several scattered documents and photos about Trinity.
The myth of Katesh was real. There are secrets out there that can change the world. I need to find them, not for my father, not for anyone else. Trinity is still out there, and they're more powerful than I ever imagined. I can stop them. I can make a difference. I can make the right difference.
This is obviously a tease for where the next game was going to take place, and is also another indication that Trinity is still very much at large throughout the rest of the world. But what happened to Lara and Anna after the source got destroyed? Surely it wouldn't have been as something as awkward as having the two of them slowly walk back to civilization through the harsh winter tundra, like the coldest walk of shame in history.
Once the credits roll, we get an extra scene where Lara and Anna are walking back to civilization in what can only be described as the coldest walk of shame in history. Anna begins to cough again, so she decides to take a seat on a nearby rock, to which Lara then uses this moment to ask her about what she meant when she said, "Another Croft doesn't have to die for this." Anna then reveals to Lara that she was ordered by Trinity to kill Richard, but couldn't go through with it because she loved him. Just as soon as she reveals this, however, she's gunned down by an unknown Trinity sniper, seemingly sent to tie up any loose ends from the whole incident. Interestingly, the sniper has a clear shot on Lara, but is ordered by an as-yet unknown superior to spare her life before the music swells, and we cut to black.
So that's the main story of Rise of the Tomb Raider out of the way and done. And now we get to talk about all the various other forms of extra content that this game provides. First up, let's talk about the most important of the bunch, a DLC chapter that finally has Lara talking about someone other than her father. Her mother.
Blood Ties is a short chapter that takes place in Croft Manor after her trip from Syria, but also before she sets out to Siberia to find the Divine Source. Essentially, her uncle Atlas de Mornay has given her a final eviction notice to leave Croft Manor unless she can provide proof that she has legal claim to the estate. Since her mother went missing and was never declared dead, and because Richard never drafted up a will to accommodate for this, the manor is by rights to go to Atlas's ownership unless some kind of proof of Amelia's death can be provided. As a result, our mission is to go on a treasure hunt around the manor to uncover secret passages, documents, and other various Easter eggs and trinkets in order to uncover the truth and get that sweet, sweet inheritance. What's really neat about this DLC is that you get to find out some really interesting tidbits about Lara's personal life, like how her and her father used to go on expeditions around the house, or what life with her and her father was like growing up. But we also get to hear about how her father and her mother ended up meeting, their feelings for each other, and Amelia's personal thoughts and her feelings from her diary.
I finally introduced Richard to the family. It went precisely how I imagined.
So, trouble with the in-laws again, I see, Mr. Croft?
I cooked myself a steak, then I drank half a bottle of whiskey and the cat.
Right, okay. That seems perfectly normal.
The manor itself is in a state of major disrepair, most likely due to the fact that there's been no true occupant in the mansion for quite some time. This is most evident in the main hall, where you can see rain pouring through into the center, where the roof has several holes in it, and also can see several places being barricaded off by wooden boards because of ongoing construction work. At various points, Lara gets audible flashbacks to moments from her childhood, which not only provides more world building, but also acts as a hint to players to advise them on where they might need to go next. The first one most players will likely stumble upon is one regarding the west wing of the manor, and was done so due to Richard wanting to protect them both from the pain of grief.
Lara, you know the west wing is off limits.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to see...
We've been through this.
Was Mum's room in here?
Just stay out of there, darling.
Remember the first trailer for this game and how it depicted Lara speaking with a therapist to try and get over the trauma of the events of Yamatai, which was the first game? Well, interestingly, although this story element was ultimately cut from the main game, we do get a nod to it here in this DLC that reveals who it was that arranged those sessions to happen in the first place.
The nod in question comes in the form of a letter from Uncle Atlas, who asks Lara if she would kindly agree to being evaluated by a psychological professional, and that she's been acting, in his words, like her father at his worst. A lot of people might not have even realized that these sessions can be listened to in their entirety in the main game at all, and this is due in no small part to them being gated off until after you finish the main story. It's nice to know that they at least remembered that this trailer existed and did something to try and weave its story elements back in, even if it was just in a small way, but the way that it's all secretly dropped in your lap the moment that you beat the game does come across like they wanted to still include the performances from those recordings, but didn't know how and when to do so organically and just settled for including it as a post-game bonus instead. Eventually, you make your way down into the servants' quarters, where we find a letter left by Winston addressed to Richard regarding Lara asking about her mother and how she set up a trap for him inside the walk-in freezer.
Later in the day, she set a trap for me in the walk-in freezer, of all places. And before I knew what was happening, I found myself locked inside. Mrs. Sheffield discovered me an hour later, shivering and somewhat peeved.
Cute. Eventually, after retracing the same steps as the treasure hunt you performed as a kid, you end up in the Manor's library where you're given clues found by searching the environment to use to solve some actual puzzles that require some actual critical thinking and not something that involves manipulating physics. Using things like maps, invisible inks, code ciphers, and various other objects to unlock hidden passages, unlock safes, and uncover secrets in a non-linear way makes this chapter all feel like one big callback to the Tomb Raider games of old. And it will come as no surprise to learn that this is the case because this DLC was developed by Nix's Software and not Crystal Dynamics. The producer of this entire DLC chapter was a woman called Linda Burgers. And yes, that is a real name, and no, she is not American. So if you enjoyed the tone and the overall presentation of this particular DLC package, then I would start with thanking her and then work your way down through the rest of the Nix's development team.
I might be alone in thinking this, but I find it kind of crazy how this small extra side chapter that's set in one location that lasts just about over an hour has more authentic feeling Tomb Raider DNA in it than a majority of the main story does.
Speaking of Tomb Raider DNA, my favourite Easter egg has to be this one in the library where you can interact with this record player and it plays Venice violins from Tomb Raider 2.
This music is familiar. It's beautiful.
I can imagine in the era of reforging the series' past, this type of Easter egg must have been quite difficult to get approved. So to whoever was involved in getting that approved, thank you. Finally, after much exploring, you gain access to the Master Key, and then use that to access your mother's atelier.
Mum's atelier.
Hang on a second, let me just look this up real quick.
From French, used in English. Atelier is how it's said in French. Now, in English, atelier. Atelier.
Who the fuck knows? Inside, you essentially see a time capsule of Amelia's life before she died. The whole room is filled with paintings from floor to ceiling, and there's even a grand piano tucked away where Lara used to be taught by her mother how to play. Eventually, though, the journal entries start to take the expected dark turn, with the once joyous-sounding memories now becoming sonnets of grief and sadness.
With Amelia gone, the manor is a different place. A dimness pervades, a quiet I can't stand. Even though Lara is too young to understand what has happened, she also senses the change. She's asked after her mother only once, and I'm afraid my reaction must have terrified her. I will need Winston more than ever these next few months to help look after her. I never quite realized how much grief can consume a man, but I am utterly consumed. I know I can't escape the pain, but I will try my damnedest to avoid it. I will seal the West Wing for as long as I live in this place. It will remain exactly as Amelia left it. Perhaps someday Lara can find her own answers there.
Once you've found the combination to the safe, you head back to the office to open it, and inside the safe you find a clay imprint of your own hand from childhood, a book on immortality written by Richard that never got published, and an audio recording detailing the moment Richard found out about Amelia's plane crash in the Tibetan mountains.
I am numb. It is taking all my willpower to hold back the overwhelming grief.
I mean, yeah, even the tape player looked shocked about it. Oh no, not Amelia, she was my favorite. It's at this point he clearly snapped and went full tilt into his research with immortality. as he speaks of wanting to recover her body to use in a Tibetan resurrection ritual that was part of his ongoing research. Amongst the belongings in the safe was a map written in invisible ink, which, when revealed, details the location of the entrance to Richard's secret lab. In here, you can find more trinkets, including another nod to Tomb Raider 2.
This was part of a set of statues Dad found in China. He thought it was linked to the Temple of Xian. Perhaps I should look into it someday.
Much later.
Come on, Lara! You bastard!
Sabatu Technologies, bouldering through the competition since 2022. But ultimately you discover proof that Amelia's body was brought back to the mansion after the Tibetan ritual failed. The lab also contains a strongly worded letter from Atlas to Richard asking if he would kindly bugger off, a crowbar to open things with, a black light that reveals the plans for a space colony arc, as well as the final piece of the puzzle needed in order to find the resting place of Amelia. Said puzzle pieces used in the floor of the main hall, which, once placed, points towards the wall at the top of the first set of stairs. So after we go up with our crowbar to ask the very nice wall, "Where is our mother?" we finally discover the lost family crypt hidden directly underneath the mansion, and the last resting place of Amelia Croft.
My dearest Lara, it is difficult to write this, knowing these may only ever be words on a page to you. I wonder if you will remember my voice. Will you remember the way we used to play and laugh? Will you remember me comforting you when you were sad? Know that I'm still with you, Lara. My energy, my love. It's within you. It always will be. Use that energy to pursue your passions in life. Never let others determine your journey. You become who you are through your choices, through the love you give and the promises you keep. I hope you are happy, that you are loved and successful in whatever it is you choose to do. I am proud of you, my darling. Remember me, with all my love, your mother.
There's a bit more to do after the credits roll, with Lara returning to the house 2 days later to find a letter from Atlas rescinding his claim to the Croft estate, as well as more artifacts and letters to find around the manor. One of the things that you can find are Roth's pistols, which are the same ones that you used at the end of the last game to kill Matthias.
I can still remember the last time I fired these.
Pistols, by the way, that she doesn't end up using until an animated Netflix series 8 whole fucking years later! But I digress! But ultimately you're free to just explore the manor for the remaining collectibles that you have yet to find. Also, side note, whoever managed to get the approval for Winston to leave a note about Jaffa cakes, genius. 10 out of 10 British reference there. Interestingly enough, this is the only part of the game that you can actually play in VR, except only on PlayStation. And because I don't actually own a VR headset on any platform, the footage that you're seeing here is actually courtesy of Uncharted Raider, who played through the entirety of the Blood Ties DLC in VR on his own console.
Get a closer look.
I just stabbed my toe on the coffee table.
R.I.P. his toe. Oh my god, that must have hurt. The last few modes to talk about are purely of a gameplay focus and less about contributing to the main narrative. The first one up is called Lara's Nightmare. And no, it's not a mode about her being forced to wear pretty dresses or act like a proper lady and have to navigate the socio-political trappings of upper-class society, and neither is it about being made to endlessly cameo in other people's games for the last 7 years in order to stay relevant and remain in the public eye. Instead, it's a horde mode that's set in Croft Manor and takes cues from the more fantastical elements of the Baba Yaga mission with its more surreal and supernatural tone. The premise is that you're trapped in the manor and have to fend off zombie-like creatures whilst exploring the manor for items and gear to progress. The more cynical-minded could view this as a thinly veiled attempt to cash in on the success of Call of Duty Zombie Mode, as the two concepts are somewhat similar, but I think Rise does just about enough to separate itself from this comparison. Unlike Call of Duty, where you're in a map and have to build and maintain barricades, set traps and earn points to use as currency to earn upgrades and purchase weapons among many, many more things, and all to aid you in your quest to battle against the never-ending hordes of undead, here in Lara's Nightmare you have a far more basic experience, where the aim is to hunt around the map for items which you use to gain access to more areas of the map, with it all culminating in a boss fight in the main hall against a visual representation of Lara's inner demons. It's a fun little mode that's good for maybe 1 or 2 playthroughs, but once you've managed to beat it, there's not really much incentive to go back unless you really, really want to try and beat your own or your friends' high scores. Thankfully, its short length means that it doesn't overstay its welcome, and as far as zombie horde modes go, it's certainly not something that I'm in a rush for the series to revisit, but as a one-off piece of experimental content, I think it's perfectly fine. Anyway, here's the game's second DLC zombie horde mode called The Cold Darkness Awakens, a mode which sees you battling through the hordes of zombie-like Trinity soldiers. The plot surrounding this challenge is that Nadia, the same Nadia from the Baba Yaga DLC, has discovered an old research base that Trinity has abandoned, but has since been reoccupied by a group of rogue soldiers. The in-universe explanation for why they're acting like zombies is due to a gas leak from this facility turning everyone in the surrounding area into mindless, angry bastards. This facility was the home to experiments performed by Soviet scientists, with an audio recording from one of them being played during the loading screen whilst accompanied by creepy old photographs, setting the appropriate tone nicely. So it's up to Lara, you know, the world's most famous guerrilla warfare expert, to put a stop to this facility by isolating the gas into the central plant, and then going into said plant and sabotaging it from the inside.
Almost there!
Stealth is the name of the game here, and it's made abundantly clear that these zombies are more attuned to sound than they are to vision, so unless you want to be suddenly inundated with a small army of vicious undead pricks, you're going to want to take these guys out as quietly as you can. During all of this, Sophia, aka Jacob's Cream Cracker, is circling up in the air in a helicopter, which means that Nadia can call out various points of interest, such as weapon caches, prisoners, and objectives.
Trinity brought an arsenal with them, and there should be a few weapons left out there. Take a look.
Now you're probably wondering why Lara and co are able to run around this particular giant gas leak without consequence, and don't worry, they do get round to explaining why this is the case, and it's just as dumb as you probably expected. Super testosterone.
Turns out Lara can run around totally unaffected by this poisonous gas because they somehow knew that this toxin doesn't affect women.
We're lucky the toxin doesn't seem to affect women.
Not yet, at any rate. I suspect it alters dihydrotestosterone production, which would explain the aggression, the rapid muscle growth, and why it affects men so quickly.
But then, only a few moments later, Nadia calls back to follow up on this, only to tell Lara that they're taking the helicopter up just a little bit higher to avoid prolonged exposure to the gas, just in case.
Hang on, you said not yet. Do you think we're at risk from the toxin after all?
Possibly. It's a chemical weapon, Nadia. Right now, I'm more worried about the immediate problem at hand.
No, that makes sense. Sophia's gonna take us up a little higher.
So I guess Lara is just fine with not wearing a gas mask and delving headfirst into this cloud of zombifying super testosterone, all whilst her comrades observe from the safety of above, unless this whole chemical leak wasn't the result of Soviet experiments, but in fact caused by the remnants of a mega protein fart that Jonah had at the beginning, leaving Lara feeling personally responsible for causing all of this, and the chemical leak story was just a cover-up, and I'm sure that her being exposed to this gas won't have any long-term effects on her own health.
If I wanted to kill Werner, I could have done that in Egypt. Okay, and if this doesn't work out, I know where to find you. Don't I, Pierre? You call these dossiers? Yuck! I ought to just take it, you runt. Choke on it.
From this moment, your every breath is a gift from me.
Oh, well, okay, maybe I was wrong. That explains a lot. Awkward.
You unsavory little cunt.
But anyway, once inside one of the silos, you're given a set of instructions by Nadia on which valves mean which, what parts of the environment to look out for, and based on those details you are told what actions you need to perform in order to deactivate that silo. Then once all 3 silos are dealt with, you then swing into the central silo and then have to sabotage the machine by shooting it. And all whilst avoiding becoming zombie food and all whilst making sure to avoid falling into the big strong Mayan fog. Not only do you have these main objectives to accomplish, but you also have up to 8 prisoners to track down and free from captivity. Finding all of them will give you access to a new weapon and another outfit to use in the main campaign, which is nice. It's a fun enough mode that's bound to keep people's attention long enough for maybe a couple of playthroughs, but once you've done everything, there's not really much incentive to want to revisit this game mode, other than maybe to revisit it to beat your previous or your friend's previous high scores.
Which brings us to our last DLC mode of the game, a survival sim mode that's vastly different from anything else on offer called Endurance. And while I fully have to admit that these type of game modes aren't really something that I'm normally into, I have to say I am curious to see if this game mode does lend credibility to this Lara's more survivalist designation.
First off, I feel I need to clarify that I had not played this game mode at all until it came to me making this video. So everything I'm going to be commenting on here will be based on my first initial playthrough, much like my video for Tomb Raider Chronicles was. And we all know how that went. With this mode, you only have 2 maps to select, with one being a dedicated tutorial area and the second being the main map for this mode. The tutorial does a relatively decent job of letting you familiarize yourself with how this mode works and what you're expected to do, which is to manage hunger, stay warm, shoot bad guys, hunt animals for food, gather resources, and search caves for artifacts. The first thing you'll be told about is how the new heat and hunger mechanics work. Essentially, they're 2 separate health bars that you'll need to focus on maintaining throughout your survivalist journey. In the wild, you can find both animals and vegetation to keep hunger locked up till lunch, and all you need to do to feed yourself is to just walk up to the animal that you've just slain, or the berry-filled bush that you like the look of, and press the interact button, which leads to several moments where you essentially see Lara Croft Tomb Raider skin a small animal and then immediately shovel it into her gob. No cooking, no prep, no plucking of feathers or skinning, just instant nommy time. And before anyone says anything, no, you can't resort to cannibalism as a hunger resource, which led to this interesting faux pas on my part during a recent livestream. No nommies on the man meat. Wait. The second meter that you're told about is to do with Lara's internal body heat, which sadly doesn't mean that you're going to be having to press X to cliffside river dance like in Final Fantasy VII. But instead means you have to actually keep your body heat topped up by standing next to a fire source or by sheltering in somewhere warm.
It's getting a little bit warmer in here.
This can be done by finding enough wood, giggity, to create your own campfire, but only on certain parts of the floor for some reason, or by finding pre-lit torches or fires around the map.
Still cold, but out of danger for the moment.
2 seconds later.
All warmed up. Time to go.
A map which for the purposes of the tutorial has a fixed layout, but is actually a procedurally generated one for each playthrough of the main experience. This means that all the resources, crypts, item drops, enemy placements, and other points of interest are different each time you start a new run, which on paper at least means that there's almost an
infinite level of replayability.
But whether or not you'll actually want to is going to be entirely up to you. You also don't start off with much in the way of weapons in this mode either. Your only starting weapon is a basic bow with barely any arrows, and you have to scavenge guns from various Trinity soldiers scattered around the map. Inside each cave are trap-filled crypts which house a relic that you can collect for extra points, as well as other items that you can use to craft healing items, ammo types, and other items to aid your survival. It's interesting to see this mode make more use of the traps found in the main campaign, and in ways that genuinely make you have to take note of your surroundings and watch your step.
Headache? What headache?
It's actually the closest this game comes to emulating the chaotic and unsafe nature of those original games, where you have no idea what traps or hazards could get thrown at you. It's certainly a little cheap and a little bit punishing if you're not careful, but this is the very sort of thing that exploring a tomb in a Tomb Raider game should be, in my opinion.
Well, I guess I've just got to accept this now, haven't I?
It's also the only game mode in Rise that has a multiplayer mode, albeit a more appropriate one in the form of a cooperative survival mode. I played this very briefly with a friend a few times, and it was an okay time. But honestly, this type of never-ending survival mode isn't exactly my cup of tea, so I didn't really feel compelled enough to play it more.
Too easy.
Then there's the Remnant Resistance mode, which is essentially a horde mode that allows you to select what objectives, enemy types, and player restrictions or buffs are applied, and then lets you pick a location, a difficulty, and a time of day that you want this mission to take place in. Again, this is a fun enough mode for maybe like a few minutes or so, and it's interesting to see the creativity that's on display from some people's submissions. But other than that, once you're done, you've pretty much played this mode and don't really have much incentive to go back again, unless you really care about beating your friends or your own personal high scores. And lastly, there's the score attack and time attack modes, which allow you to replay each chapter of the game with a more arcadey flair as you play for points by collecting these blue flames that multiply your score, or instead play to race against the clock for the fastest completion time possible. And what happens with all these points that you've been accumulating? Well, you get to spend them on unlocking more packs of random cards. The same cards that you've no doubt seen pop up before you play these new extra modes and wondered where you got them from. Well, you'll be pleased to know that Rise of the Tomb Raider was yet another game at the time of launch that indulged in the whole loot box gaming mechanic, where you have a marketplace to browse where you can purchase themed packs of modifier cards to allow you to make the game as hard, as easy, or as crazy as you liked. Nowadays, these cards don't cost you real money to purchase and instead solely rely on you completing these challenges to earn them through gameplay, but at launch, you could buy packs in this game for real-world actual fucking money. Because I guess nothing says Tomb Raider like making you pay real money for a fucking big head mode card that's a one-time use. Oh yeah, not all of these cards are permanent, by the way. Some of these are consumable, and once you've used them, they will be gone until you find them in a random card pack again. So I hope you enjoyed those explosive chickens, because they're not going to be roosting here for long. Not to mention that this game also launched with a season pass, which includes the DLC that I mentioned earlier, and a bunch of costumes and cards, but also locked the Extreme Survivor difficulty mode behind a paywall too. And of course, this is all a non-issue, with every single piece of content now being a standard part for all modern versions of this game, but it still sucked at the time to see this franchise being yet another example of a game totally okay with diving headfirst into these shitty practices in order to try and make a quick buck. Certainly wasn't the worst, sadly wasn't the last. All in all, Rise of the Tomb Raider certainly is the most feature-stacked game in the modern Survivor trilogy, to a point where it can sort of feel a little bit overwhelming and overstuffed at times. And for the most part, the stuff that it's packed with, I wouldn't even personally consider being stuff that suits the Tomb Raider series that well. I mean, you've got endurance modes, 2 horde shooter modes, score attack modes, gameplay modifier cards, a marketplace, and DLC costumes with stat bonuses, and it all feels a little bit out of focus. For as much criticism as this era of the series gets from fans who don't like this version of the character, some of it totally justified in my opinion, I think it's important to highlight the moments that these games do well, and aside from their tendency to over-rely on physics puzzles, I think I'd find it hard to fault Rise on its tombs, for the most part. It's clear that they took the feedback from the previous game, with many bemoaning the fact that tombs, the very thing this series is named after, being mostly relegated to being optional content, and then deciding to make them more of a focus here. Not only are there more compulsory tombs weaved into the main narrative, but there are also a decent amount of optional areas for players to explore that reward you for taking the time to explore each more thoroughly. And while I appreciated what these areas had to offer in terms of expanding the game's overall story and giving more character to the area of Katesh, they still all suffer from the same problem. They all involve physics puzzles and climbing. This is mostly due to them turning the bow into a Swiss Army knife-like multi-tool capable of performing a multitude of combat and puzzle-solving actions, and then building these puzzles around that central mechanic with no wiggle room for anything else. Tombs in the older games were dangerous and full of various different traps and obstacles that were designed to catch you off guard and keep the player under constant tension. They had movable blocks that you could use to clear a path, or use as a way to reach higher places, or use them to activate pressure plates on the floor that open up new areas. There were also levers or buttons that you could find to open up hatches or doors in totally different locations. And perhaps most importantly, they also had you hunting for keys and items that required thought in order to work out where to use them. Here in Rise, there were some attempts to bring more of a classic design philosophy back, but it really feels like more of the same with 2013, but just with a few optimizations and sprinkles on top. No sooner do we get introduced to their version of spike pits, leg traps, and pressure plates, does the game almost completely forget about them in favor of the usual physics puzzles, levers, and climbing about. It's almost like someone had these ideas for ways to make tombs more interesting, but either had no true idea how to properly incorporate them into the main game naturally, or their inclusion was significantly reduced due to them feeling too cheap or frustrating in execution. Ultimately though, for their more combat-heavy Hollywood blockbuster approach to the series, I begrudgingly feel it was the right call, as it could have messed with the flow of the experience too much and led to constant cheap-feeling deaths. Speaking of combat, perhaps the biggest part of this entire game is the combat system, and if you thought the last game had a heavy focus on combat, then this game sure takes the cake on that front. Mechanically, there's not a whole lot that's too different about this game from the previous game. There's just more of it. They both play nearly identically, with a lot of the same mechanics being brought over and refined further. However, the biggest difference is this time around, it mostly delivers on the developers' previous claims of you being able to avoid combat altogether. Yes, there are still several Tomb Crisis shooting gallery sections where combat is unavoidable, but for the rest of the game you can pick and choose your fights, with way more ways to stealth attack your foes that don't involve hiding in bushes. However, this is where I feel the series really started to lose its way on what it's actually supposed to all be about. Whilst on paper you're going through the motions of exploring areas to progress so you can stop the bad guys from using that MacGuffin for evil deeds, in practice there's so much that's just being constantly overshadowed by the game's aggressive implementation of combat that you really start to wonder if the people making these games truly understood what makes Tomb Raider tick. Sure, it's a fun enough game to play, and when the shit hits the fan you never feel like you're incapable of being able to handle what gets thrown your way, and all the weapons feel really good to use. But if there's one thing that I can say for certain, is that the combat in Tomb Raider has always been the side dish for the main course that were the tombs, the puzzles, and the exploration. Here, it just feels like they're trying to swap the two around and hope that no one will notice. Of course, that's not to say that combat doesn't belong in a Tomb Raider game at all, full stop, but the fact that the most authentic Tomb Raider feeling part of this entire game was an optional DLC chapter made by another studio with no combat whatsoever speaks volumes. The platforming in this game feels just as good as before, with her existing moveset being carried over from the last game and expanded upon to be more varied here. Turning your spare climbing axe into a grappling hook was especially neat, as it allowed you to be able to save yourself from a nasty fall at the last minute, which is incredibly useful. The crafting system was handled better this time around, with it being expanded to include allowing for health and ammo crafting whilst on the go, and this meant that the pacing of the game could be kept more brisk by allowing you to refill supplies wherever you wanted and without having to stop at a campsite to do so. It also made better use of the environment by incentivizing the player to actively seek out crafting items hidden at various points of the map, as the rewards were not limited to just one specific type of thing. Visually though, this game looks stunning, and still to this day, it can't be faulted how good this game actually looks. Especially the opening segment where you're on top of the mountain during the snowstorm and you can pan the camera around to get this truly gorgeous looking vista. Truly great stuff. The segments underground involving the Lost City were also a great visual highlight, with these gigantic caves covering the whole thing in this icy blanket, the architecture being full of these neat historical details, full of intricate murals or macabre post-battle dioramas, like the whole place had been literally frozen in time. But regardless of everything else, the aesthetic is always something that this era of the series really nails, which is a given considering how technology has advanced since the mid-2000s. The character models in this game are all pretty good in their overall construction, with a lot of finer details and facial subtleties being clear and visible, and the motion capture and vocal performances are all top-notch here too. But there's just this uncanny valley effect sometimes with the facial capture, which caused me to chuckle a few times at the strange shapes these characters' faces would often contort into. I'm not sure how to describe it other than that sometimes they look like they're wearing someone else's face over their own face. Almost like they're suffering from either a severe nut allergy or a mixture of jaundice and edema. I kept looking at Lara, waiting for her to pull out an EpiPen because I thought Trinity was shooting her with peanuts or something. Also, please tell me I'm not the only one that sees this. And I realize I've gone this far for this long without mentioning the game's soundtrack or the sound design at all, and this is primarily because there's nothing really to say about it other than it sounds really good. Weapons have a satisfying soundscape when used, effects like fire and shattering glass have lots of fidelity to them, and it's clear that great attention was paid to making everything sound immersive. The music is also good too, with the main composer for this game being Bobby Tahori, who is known for composing additional music for the TV show Game of Thrones and was a main composer for Marvel's Missed Potential, Avengers. And while I won't say that the music in Rise is bad, it certainly fits the tone of this game and sets the mood appropriately, but if you were to hold a gun to my head and get me to hum a tune from the soundtrack that wasn't the main theme, I'd just ask you to give me the gun so I could finish the job myself. It's one of those modern soundtracks where it sounds both high quality but underwhelming, overproduced but forgettable, intricate in its composition but fails to provide any memorable hooks or melodies aside from referencing a leitmotif that someone else wrote. I realize that this is a completely subjective thing to be talking about and critiquing, as music certainly can be enjoyed by one group but hated by another, but when I can vividly recall tracks from Nathan McCree, Peter Connolly, Martin Iverson and Charles Brun-Folman but couldn't tell you a single melody from Rise other than the reboot Tomb Raider theme, that says a lot. And again, I'm fully expecting people to disagree with me on this subject, and that's totally fine. But the point I wanted to make is how Rise's music seems to be more for background noise than having tracks that stand out on their own. I think the most standout thing about the soundtrack is the abundance of aggressive percussion and horns it has, and even then it felt like I was playing the movie Inception, which oddly enough makes sense because Bobby Tahori worked for Hans Zimmer's production company, Remote Control Productions, so I guess a little bit of Hans must have rubbed off on Bobby during the making of this game's music. Oh god, not like that. The vocal delivery from all the voice cast are really good here as well, and as much as it pains me to pay Richard Croft yet another compliment, the vocal performance for his character was certainly top-notch too. Camilla's portrayal of Lara still somewhat eludes me, however, and as much as I understand her English accent was the result of her being torn between two worlds due to Grey's Anatomy and living in the US, it still doesn't hide the fact that it often comes across as an inauthentic imitation.
No! No, you bastard!
Still, when her accent does eventually land on a region of the UK and stays consistent, her performance as a young and still naive adventurer is perfectly believable. Yes, her haughty Hermione Granger on crack dialect can get a little tiring, and her grunts and groans during the more physically intense moments are still as meme-worthy as ever. Maybe not as much as Keeley's. But for the most part, she puts in the work and gets the job done, especially with the physical performance side of things too. The supporting cast of characters are well performed, if a bit unremarkable, and even for as little screen time as he has, returning actor Earl Baylor manages to pull in a great performance as Jonah, and Olivia Vernal turns in a fantastically emotive performance as Lara's mother Amelia too. In terms of the overall plot, this game's story I would say is okay. Not terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but not one that I would really say is massively memorable to me. Well, outside of Richard Croft, that is, and for the wrong reasons. It starts off pretty strong with the introduction to Trinity, and how they're linked to her and her family I'd say was interesting enough. Then you start learning about the history of the Valley of Katesh with the Byzantine Empire, the Deathless Prophet, and all that other funky stuff, and that was pretty cool. The Trinity twins I thought were perfectly fine foil for Lara's heroism, with one of them having an interesting tie into Lara's own past that made Lara's journey through Katesh feel a bit more meaningful with more personal stakes. But all the Richard Croft stuff became so overbearing to a point where it almost robs Lara of her own agency and lessens the personal impact she otherwise would have had. The game takes seemingly every moment of downtime, often at points where it doesn't make sense for her to do so, to have Lara reminisce about her father and say how great and misunderstood he was, and how she's determined to show the world that he wasn't crazy. It makes her come across like that's all that she's doing all of this for. Not for herself, not for her own spur or drive for adventure, but all to fulfill her father's legacy instead of truly carving out her own path. And again, had this plot element been used sparingly, it would have had a much greater positive effect on the overall story. But when he's constantly popped into moments where she rests at campsites, moments where she falls unconscious or drifts off to sleep, or even moments directly after surviving a near-death experience, it just comes across as an unhealthy obsession for her. Let me put it this way. If they would have just left in the chat about her father at the beginning of the game but amended it to include a line about his suicide, kept the scene where his research is stolen by Trinity, then had a few sparse lines at key points in the game about her discoveries lining up with her father's research, and then finishing with Constantine's assassination reveal, and then bookending the whole game with the final shot of her listening to one of his tapes as she leaves Croft Manor, I think people would have been way more receptive to the character and reacted more positively as a result. Heck, even the lead writer Rhianna Pratchett didn't like this direction they went with this character for Rise. But according to her, this was a decision made by the higher-ups at Crystal Dynamics, and she just had to make peace with that and crack on.
All in all, I'd have to say that Rise of the Tomb Raider was a step in the right direction for this particular era of the series, but it's a step that takes a few unsteady ones in order to get there. For everything it succeeds in doing as a modern action game, it seems to come at the cost of the series' own identity as a result. Sure, there are more tombs this time around, and yes, there's a lot of content packed into this game that's fun and enjoyable to play, but when a large chunk of the whole experience feels like the very antithesis of what this series is meant to be about, it does feel like this series has kind of lost its way a little. I'm sure it's all growing pains though. After all, we're past the origin story phase now, and it's only the second reboot game to come out now in this brand new era. And I'm sure with over 1 million copies sold worldwide in the first year, and 7 million sold by 2017, that the inevitable sequel will finally let us embark on a new adventure where we finally have become the Tomb Raider that we all know and love. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to kick back, relax, and watch some good old-fashioned TV. Till next time.
Coming up next is a sneak peek of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, where she finally becomes the Tomb Raider she was always meant to be.
Oh, for fuck's sake.